On Point is brought to you by National Baking Company.
Good evening and welcome to On Point. I'm your host, Kalila Reynolds.
And I'm Dennis Chung.
How are you, Dennis?
I'm good.
How was Valentine's Day?
Well, normal day for me. How was it for you?
You're romantic every day, huh?
Exactly. How was it for you?
It was okay as well.
Can't you got any chocolate?
Of course.
Okay, that's great.
Well, speaking of goodies, we're taking a look at the budget this week, and later on we'll be talking to the new mayor of Kingston, Senator Delroy Williams.
Yes, both discussions should be very good. Dr. Phillips is set to assume the leadership of the opposition party. So he's going to be speaking not just from the position of opposition spokesman on finance, but I'm sure he's going to be forward-looking.
As presumptive party leader.
Yes.
Yes. But first, let's take a look back at some of the top business stories in the headlines this week.
Number 5 is in South Africa. The country's competition watchdog is accusing local and international banks of rigging the price of South Africa's currency, the rand. Global giants Barclays, JP Morgan, and HSBC are among 17 banks named as part of the 2-year investigation. The commission says banks colluded using online chat rooms to coordinate fictitious bids and offers in order to sway the market. It's called for the banks to be fined 10% of in-country annual turnover. Number 4 brings us back to Jamaica. The government has banned the export of copper effective immediately. The move is intended to discourage the theft of copper cables. The government has also increased the fine for those found breaching the regulations from $2 million to $3 million. It can also land you 2 years in prison. At number 3, Jamaica and Venezuela have signed an agreement to expand the Petrojam refinery in Kingston. The refinery's capacity is to be increased to 55,000 barrels per day. The upgrade is expected to cost $850 million. However, Energy Minister Dr. Andrew Wheatley would not say how the project will be financed. Number 2 goes to another project signing. Finance Minister Audley Shaw has signed a $326 million loan agreement with the China Exim Bank for the new Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project and the extension of the tolled East-West Highway from Maypen to Williamsfield. The signing took place in Beijing, China, where Minister Shaw is on a mission along with a team from the Finance Ministry. And our top business story this week goes to the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, which is urging the government to place greater importance on manufacturing. JMA President Mitri Siaga says legislation is needed to facilitate more opportunities for local manufacturers, whom he says don't get a fair shake on bidding for government contracts. Meanwhile, the JMA is also cautioning the government against taking funds from the National Housing Trust, NHT, for budgetary support.
And when we come back, opposition spokesman on finance Dr. Peter Phillips joins us for a look at the budget right here on Point. Welcome back. Well, the government tabled a $710 billion budget last week. That's a 20% increase over last year's budget.
With inflation forecast at 5% this fiscal year, it's still about a real increase of about 15%. Here's more on that.
The government has tabled a budget of approximately $710 billion for the fiscal year ending March 2018, over $117 billion more than the last one. The main areas contributing to the increase include public sector wages and salaries and, as usual, debt. The government is paying some $88 billion more for capital aid debts this year and a total of over $193 billion on public sector wages and salaries. In terms of revenue collection, the government plans to collect some $689 billion this fiscal year. That's $21 billion less than what they plan to spend. That's one of the tax gaps Finance Minister Audley Shaw is expected to address when he opens the debate in Parliament on March 9. In the meantime, Finance Minister Audley Shaw says the Auditor General will now have 2 weeks to examine the feasibility of the budget he has tabled.
And we're joined now by Opposition Spokesman on Finance, Dr. Peter Phillips, for an assessment of the budget. Welcome to On Point. Again, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome, Dr. Phillips. In your capacity, now as Opposition Spokesman on Finance, but soon to be Leader of the Opposition. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Our commiserations. Both.
Well, both of them, yeah. Yes. The budget has just been read. What's your overview of it?
Well, as you mentioned, it's 20% larger, even taking account of inflation, it's 15% larger. But in reality, it doesn't reflect a growth impetus. The bulk of this is going to be spent on wages and debt service. So we're looking at about 71% of the overall budget is for debt service and for wages. Programs are about 22% of it, and the capital expenditure on the central government account is about 7%. So it's a pretty tight budget, and it is going to involve also significant revenue raising over and above what is projected to be raised just because of inflation and growth estimates.
Before we get to the revenue raising, it's interesting to hear you say it's a tight budget, given that it's $710 billion, and as you mentioned, 20% higher than last year, 15% with inflation accounted for. So why do you call it a tight budget in that context?
Well, first of all, because as I said, it doesn't involve a significant improvement on your capital expenditure side, which is where you get the growth impetus driving from. And secondly, because in the critical areas that would mark development, like your educational expenditure, your security expenditure, given the huge problem that we're having now from crime and violence, it's relatively flat. So that you have an additional $5 billion, I believe, on security and a $5 billion on education. These are the things that are going to have to drive it. Now, admittedly, so you don't have, we all know, and I think every department of government would have wanted more. We also can look at the experience this year where the capital budget was significantly underspent. So even with this small, relatively small share of the budget going to capital expenditure, we still can have a question mark about the capacity to spend on projects.
But what causes that undercapacity to spend?
Well, no doubt there may be a lot of factors. Issues have been raised by the Minister of Finance about the procurement rules, but the truth is the procurement rules could be addressed. But by the same token, the whole effort to move to the public investment management systems with a 3-year rolling project horizon was intended to overcome some of those weaknesses in procurement and project implementation. Part of it may be that the government decided to change priorities. Part of it may be just lack of clarity as to their priorities that they want to invest in. And I think there is the question of just the management capacity that is at work.
So what accounts for the large increase in the overall budget then? Is it mostly
debt service? Debt service. The share of debt service and wages is higher this year than it was last year, right?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well,
It was programmed in the IMF.
Well, part of it is the way it has bunched. There was also some pre-financing, but there is a question also of, even if you are going to raise revenues, as was done last year, was the use to which that revenue was put the best uses? I mean, this is where you have policy differences that will arise.
On that matter, Dr. Phillips, could you address the matter of the NHT funds and what your view is on it? Do you think we should be going back there? Because it seems practical that we have no choice.
Well, what I do know is that the current administration made a big to-do about the drawdown of the NHT resources at the time when we did it. As everyone knows, they went to court over the matter and said they would never do it.
So if they go there, will you be going to court?
No.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I think that I would hope, although I am not necessarily sanguine, but that we need to get a more rational and mature approach to some of the policy choices.
But it's not quite
in
the same
addition,
thing. It's not quite the same thing what they are doing now, drawing dividends, as opposed to what your administration
It's effectively
did.
the same thing.
well, it's resources,
Yeah.
resources coming from the NHT. Now, the $2 billion, the question is, though, that we still don't know if that's the full extent of what's going to be done. But I would say that in the circumstances now are not as dire in straight public finance terms as they were in 2012-13, because it would have meant a significantly larger tax take over and above what was taken to just put the country's finances on a path where we actually could
Under your
sustain.
administration,
Yes.
yeah.
Where we could sustain. This particular revenue-raising problem that the government faces is largely a problem of choice. You know, it's like in military terms, people talk about wars of choice and wars that are of defense, survival. You have been attacked. This is a revenue-raising package that is and a difficulty which is born out of an ill-conceived decision. We were promised by the country, by the Jamaica Labour Party,
Yes.
that they were going to give this increase in the tax threshold without any taxation. We said then that it was not possible. Events have proven that it was not possible. So we have, the government implemented a $14 billion tax package last year. And in order to do the second leg, there's going to have to be around $16 billion this year. In addition, there are the debt service charges that they have to confront. And there is the wage settlement, which they have estimated at 6%, but it is still moot, because according to the fiscal policy paper, no formal negotiations have got underway. So it is still a moot question, still uncertain.
Dr. Phillips.
Whether the trade unions representing the public sector and the public sector workers are going to settle for the amount that is there. And even if you're going to separate workers, there is still a cost attached to that.
On that matter of the move towards what the philosophies that we're moving towards indirect taxation. But I don't know if you have done the analysis, but I did some analysis and showed that last fiscal year, the one we're in now, the direct taxation component of the total revenue is 27%, and what's proposed is 29% makeup. So it means that on that basis, strictly, we would not be moving towards
there is a
indirect taxation.
there is a significant projection in the current budget for a sizable increase in the PAYE take.
Yes, that's curious.
Huh?
So we're not really
to
moving
make your
towards
point,
indirect
but which
taxation.
raises again, like the NHT, like the original promise, and like what these numbers seem to imply, what can we believe of what we are being told by the government? We'll see, however.
It's the same point I was just wondering, because in addition to, well, I shouldn't say in addition to, as part of all the moves that you've mentioned, these revenues that will need to be raised to finance phase 2 of the income tax plan, the increases in public sector wages, for example, we're going to be ending up with a, well, based on the numbers that were tabled, a $21 billion revenue or budget gap between what the government intends to spend and what it projects it will
That's
collect.
the extent of that's the extent of the revenue raising
That's right.
that will be needed. Plus, the passive projections as set out have you at a 6.5% primary surplus number, which
should be
has
at
to be
7.
raised to 7.
Right.
Right.
Which means possibly another $8 billion over and above.
So where do you go ahead?
Well, probably the same question.
Where is it going to
Based
come
on,
from?
exactly. Based on your cursory analysis of the numbers tabled, where do you see it coming from?
Well, the people. It's coming from the people. However you swing it, it means that the government is going to be exercising this power to really take money from the population. This is money that is not going to go into consumption by these same people, many of whom are on the edge right now of survival, and who have to rely on the very social services that are still being starved of money. So the tax shock of last year and the tax shock this year, the question we have to ask ourselves in policy terms, was this well thought out policy? That's the first thing. What effect on growth will that policy have? I mean, and just as an aside, all the projections about the rates of growth are not talking about 5 and 4. I mean, if you look at the medium-term projections going on. But that's an aside. I mean, if you can do something that pumps it up, so good. A separate and more relevant consideration is that there is the risks and the buffers against risks are being removed to a degree as the world economy, to my mind, is seeming riskier. So we have not, as far as I understand it, continued with the hedge on oil. I don't think there's quite apart from the hedge, I don't think the Energy Stabilization Fund, which we had sought to set up, is in place. So those monies are just in general revenues. Now, if I look at the deteriorating relations between the United States and Iran, for example, or the deteriorating relations and the turbulence in the US-China relations, all of these things, remote as they might seem, have moved sharply downwards and can potentially have a tremendous effect on our oil import bill, which is a huge component. Remittances, given the new immigration policy in the United States, that's another area of risk. So when our finances as a country are as precarious as they still remain, we have to be careful about how we manage those finances despite the needs, because the end can be worse than the beginning. If Jamaican workers feel pressured and the remittance flows dip, it's going to have a huge impact.
So if you were in government, how would you mitigate against those risks?
Well, first of all, as we said at the very outset, that we were inclined not to raise the threshold at the same pace, certainly to use whatever relaxation in the in the tightness of public finances to offer the increases, not to do it through revenue raising, and certainly not to do it through regressive revenue raising. Our basic path was to lower rates of taxation generally, including raising the revenue raising the threshold as we had done 3 times in the 4 years, but at a pace that didn't unduly stress. To unify the rates on the corporate side and lower the effective rates of taxation also on the corporate side, so you could attract more investment, and particularly to relieve through the Energy Stabilization Fund, to relieve the pressure on our energy bill that we have. You know, if we were to have learned anything from the 1970s, with the oil price shock first, and then the lowering of the price of oil, is that markets go up and they come down. We can't assume that the lowered price is going to remain the same as always, and we must take advantage of the years of low price to prepare for it going up again. Even the Bible tells you there are years of plenty, years of lean. You need to prepare in the years of plenty for the years of lean.
You don't think we're preparing enough right now?
I don't see it.
You raised a point earlier about the impact of another potential tax package to fund phase 2 of the 1.5. But some might point to how it's gone last year. Phase 1, $14 billion in taxes for that tax package to fund phase 1, yet there was 2% growth in the latter part of the year.
That has no connection.
How can it have no connection?
No, I'll tell you why. First of all, it was all the growth numbers are within the projections of the original program. Nothing is out of line. What had faltered...
But the 1.5 wasn't in the original program.
Therefore, it has added nothing to the projections then, is one way of looking at what you are saying.
It hasn't detracted either.
Yeah, because what it is also taking away from is the real development expenditures on your education, security, and all the rest of it. There, you know, because that's where real development comes from, you know. Improving the performance of your school system, where we still have, not only, we still have about 50% of the population, at least, that is basically being left behind. If you use as the measure the number of students in each age cohort that pass 5 subjects or more, including maths and English, as the basic matriculation requirements into tertiary institutions, or to effective knowledge-based work environment. If you can't, every generation that you leave outside of the ambit of this quality education is a generation that is going to remain poor. So that's the challenge that we have. Crime and security. We have seen all the estimates about what the increment on growth would be if you deal with it. We were promised by the Prime Minister that we would see in this budget. Last year he said we will see a substantial increase in the outlays. It's not in this. Indeed, what is in the last budget for motor vehicles, for example, hasn't been spent. We haven't seen them. Now they say they're ordering another 100. That's not going to make a huge difference.
You don't think we're paying enough attention from a budgetary point of view?
From a budgetary point of view, the choices we have to make, we had to make, is if there is any slack, how do you spend that slack? There was no slack We gave away what we did not have. But the promise was that we would give it away without having to raise taxes. It was an ill-conceived promise. The government still tries to rescue its reputation. The minister says he gives with one and takes with the other. And that's all just smoke and mirrors. The reality is there was no slack, and you have added a shock to the system.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, Dr. Phillips. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to all of these issues being mentioned in the budget debate, including your presentation in March.
Thank you very much.
Opposition spokesman on finance, Dr. Peter Phillips. More on Point after this break. Welcome back. Well, the new JLP-led Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation, KSAC, is nearing its first 100 days in office.
Senator Delroy Williams was sworn in as mayor on December 15th, 2016. He presides over a razor-thin majority in the KSAC. Here's more on that.
Going into the local government elections, the JLP was confident that it had delivered sufficiently as the party in government to come out with a win in most of the municipal corporations, and that they did. However, winning the coveted Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation, KSAC, wasn't easy. While other corporations were declared early on election night, the KSAC was left late until in the evening, which saw the JLP coming home with a one-seat majority. That majority was challenged in the courts. However, the final tally in the magisterial recount did not change the outcome. Now in charge of the KSAC, the ruling parties focused on repositioning Kingston as a tourism destination, especially since the city was given a Creative City designation by UNESCO in 2015. With plans to tap into this more as a selling point for Kingston as the home of culture and music in the region, the government is hoping to rake in much-needed foreign exchange. There are also plans to redevelop Kingston as a cruise port, and the fact that a ship docked in the Kingston Harbor recently for the first time in decades makes this reality not so far-fetched.
We interviewed Mayor Williams recently about his plans for the city. Here's that interview. And we're pleased to be joined now by the new mayor of Kingston, Senator Delroy Williams. Welcome to On Point.
Thanks very much.
Welcome, Mayor.
Thanks for having me.
Mayor, what are some of your goals, and are there any challenges you see within the KSAC that needs to be dealt with?
Well, the goals are really captured in the vision for Kingston and St. Andrew. And the vision is clear. I've said is to make Kingston the capital city of the Caribbean, and really a city with influence in Latin America and recognition internationally. We think that the goals are achievable. Just recently, the New York Times named us among, people like to say top 50, but I like to say among the top 25 cities internationally that visitors want to visit. And I know that approximately 70% of people who visit annually visit cities, which means that it presents an enormous opportunity for Kingston as a city.
So how do we get there? How do we complete that dream, fulfill that vision of making Kingston the capital of the Caribbean?
Well, we have to commit ourselves to some basics. The market is there. People want to come to Kingston. And so Kingston is really the pathway to grow Jamaica. I like to say, as a mayor, it's very easy for me to say that, but it is true. Now, we have to establish order. And people might see order. What is order? There is the structure of order. So you have to have an orderly city, a secured city, and in terms of security, orderly city. And that is a major challenge, and that is a challenge that I have to take on as the mayor of the city, which means that you order the entire city. It's not just in terms of the security aspect of it. There is the aspect, in all respect, there is the aspect of the markets, there's the transportation, entering and leaving the city. All of that would come under order.
Mayor, I'm happy you mentioned that, because I think you hit the nail on the head, the matter of order. Two things come to mind. Number one, the illegal parking, and number two, the illegal vending are those issues that you have on the table to address?
Well, there are major issues. In terms of parking, parking is essential if you're going to make Kingston economic life, downtown Kingston, for example, the economic life of the municipality. So we find that we have to increase the parking spaces to the people who use downtown. For example, using downtown, but you have downtown New Kingston. I'm just using downtown as an example. It's very difficult to go and to want to shop or to use the facilities or to visit offices downtown, and you can't find the parking spaces. So part of our mission is to increase the parking spaces by going towards on-street, what we call on-street parking, paid parking. So we can increase the parking spaces. We should reduce the illegal parking, because people park illegally because they're parking on the streets, and it's no parking. It would be categorized as no parking. If we make a lot of those areas parking areas and charge for it, then we reduce the issue of illegal parking. But then there is the issue of wrecking. I mean, people know it as wrecking.
So you use meters?
There are various ways you can do it. I mean, you can use meters, and there are other ways. But we are exploring right now what is the method that is probably would be best suited for Kingston. The vendors are critical to the economy of the city. Cities across the globe, all cities across the globe.
But we don't want them on the streets.
So you don't want, so you want to regulate, and you want to establish the order. Part of that is really to look at the issue carefully and not just act quickly. Now, our first move is really a direction that we're taking is to, where possible, pedestrianize. So there are streets that we can pedestrianize, meaning there are vendor streets. That requires dialogue with the store owners and the vendors, because once you start to pedestrianize, then you have to be orderly. You have to establish the order, the parameters. When we begin to do that, it gives us, I believe, the moral authority to enforce, to create the order. Right now, I think we need that moral authority. We need the legitimacy. So we need for the vendors to see that we are taking steps to include them, to include their business activity. But they will also have to give back, because we need order. I've said to them very clear that there are economic benefits to order, and that they can capitalize on order. And once we establish order, it would benefit the vendors more. So there is the step of pedestrianizing, of registering, of rebuilding and restructuring and refurbishing the markets. There are markets that have been burnt down, and we need to refurbish those markets or rebuild those markets, but with a different design, with a design that will push shoppers into the markets. Because as we find now, a lot of shoppers really don't like to go to the market. And the design is one avenue that you can use to push vendors into the market. There's the issue of the Jubilee market, and I'm having an issue with the design of the Jubilee market, because it's very close to Orange Street, which is a prime area. We are at the KCMC looking at if we have a mall type market. Because, you know, by just virtue of being a mall, it's attractive to shoppers. You know, people like to go into a mall, and you design the mall in such a way so you get shoppers to move around the mall. And there's the issue of food court. So you have a food court in the mall that will drive people into. And we will take a lot of vendors off the streets by creating that kind of facility that they are comfortable with, that they believe that shoppers will come into, and that what they are selling will be exposed to the shoppers.
So another thing that always gets to me, the matter of residential communities when commercial people start moving in and destroy residential communities. Are you, as mayor of the KSLC, going to say this must stop, and people can call in to the KSLC for it to be dealt with, so that commercial operations are removed from residential communities?
Certainly, it's an issue that we have to, the law is the law, and we have to enforce the law.
So you are going to enforce it,
Yes,
because in the past they haven't been enforcing
No,
it?
they haven't really. And then there is the issue of also, we really need a spatial plan for the entire, nationally. But we, being the mayor of Kingston and St. Andrew, we need a spatial plan. There are issues in terms of, the business is expanding. There are, the area is limited. So there are, at times you have to expand into areas that you were deemed originally residential areas. But now, because there are no space in the business community, people have to expand out into those areas.
But then that
those are issues we have to really look at.
Formally through a zoning process.
And through a zoning process.
Yeah, and similarly, if someone has an abandoned house within a community, something can be done about that, right? I mean,
Yes.
where it grew up and is not being maintained.
And if they have it also downtown Kingston.
Right. So
which we have many of those downtown
and what you
Kingston.
can do, you can actually possess and sell those things to recover.
Can you?
Can you do that?
So what we do now is really we give notices, and we can go and we can do the bushing and the
then charge
clearing
back.
and then charge. And if we do it enough, it should be enough.
Does
then it
does
can
that-
amount to.
Does that work though? Do people actually pay you back after you've done the
Yes,
service?
people do. People
pay back.
People pay.
Because if they don't pay back, you have the right to seize the property.
Yes, we can. There are other steps we can take.
I want to talk a bit about Kingston as a tourist destination, because earlier, well, this month in January, I think it was, or was it in December, we actually had a cruise ship visiting Kingston for the first time in a long time, in a few years. And I feel like it created a bit of excitement in the city. It's something that we hadn't
I
seen.
have said to people that the cruise shipping, which is part of the whole move to make Kingston a destination, is singularly the most important activity right now that can really transform the economy of Kingston. Transform not only downtown, but the entire Kingston and St. Andrew. So it requires a lot of attention, it requires resources, it requires a full commitment.
So
of
have
the
you been
government.
in dialogue with the stakeholders in the industry to
And
try
they
to
are
attract
all
the
on
ships?
board. They are all on board. I know the government is on board.
When
the
you say they're
the
on
Ministry
board-
of Tourism is, meaning they are all working towards this end.
So there's no specific commitment yet for more ships to come?
No, because there are some things that we really need to put in place
Before
there's the issue of building the cruise shipping pier,
the facility.
the facility to accommodate cruise shipping. And then there is the issue of you have to now prepare your city for this day.
But
Which means that's part of our job, to ensure that we have the order in the city.
So
that will
building the
make it
cruise
easy.
shipping pier, who's going to be doing that and when? We really want to hear some
Now, I
timelines.
have given the KSA MC in terms of our leadership on this issue, but it's a multi-stakeholders issue. So I've given at the KSA MC, we have given ourselves 3 years.
That's a project you'll be undertaking.
Yeah, I'm committed to it, and I'll be, as far as possible, be leading on it. And 3 years is, I don't intend to go into the 4th year
Without that pier.
without that.
So that's a 4 in 4.
Yes. And because I really believe it will transform the entire Kingston and St. Andrew.
The other thing, Mayor, recently Minister Mackenzie spoke about councillors who are not paying their own property tax and
Yes.
at the same time trying to enforce. Your position is that you are not going to tolerate that in your...
No, councillors really, I mean, the people, because there is a period to pay. And there are times people, for one reason or the other, sometimes people don't remember, or sometimes it takes time, they might go over the time allotted to pay.
But if
But
there's
they
any
do
chronic,
pay.
but if there's
Eventually
any
they
chronic,
do pay.
if
That's-
there's
that's
any,
my experience.
if there's
They
any
do pay.
chronic situation though, you're not tolerating that.
No. You're not tolerating people not paying for for an entire year or 2 years. Or so. But my experience is that councillors do pay.
So, Mayor, when you say not tolerating your councillors who don't pay, if there are any, what do you mean by that? What are you going to do to them?
No, it's quite easy. Once you say to councillors, remember to pay your property taxes, they will. No resistance.
So if you find delinquency, you just expect them to?
No, they will pay.
Okay.
They are not that, they are not delinquent.
Mayor, another issue that has been out there, this white elephant downtown, the bus park. What we intend to do with that? I mean, because some order is definitely needed in terms of transportation downtown.
And what we plan to do, we have been looking at it, initial moves, is there is Darling Street. So what we intend to do is to join Darling Street. Darling Street really comes out in front of the bus park, but there is a railway. So what we intend to do is to connect Darling Street to the bus park, meaning, so it's going to be exiting on Water Lane, which makes it easier for the people using downtown to get to the bus park. So that is one issue because of the access to the bus park. It's hard for people to go there. So by extending Darling Street to Water Lane, then we make it easier for them. So that's one route. The next is to regulate, is to determine and order how the buses enter and leave downtown and enforce it.
Yeah, because I mean, that's one of the problems. We always put things in place and do enforce it. Yeah. The other thing though is how you guarantee the security of the people. Because it's sort of remote where it is, So the security of the people,
that comes by opening up downtown. And what we mean by that is that there are a lot of roadways not being used by vehicular traffic. So our intention is to open up. So we're going to rehabilitate those roadways. For example, there's Tower Street, which runs parallel to Arbor Street, taking you from one end of downtown to the next. So what we're going to do is to do the same for Tower Street as is Arbor Street. So we're going to take Tower Street from one end to the next end. So you get the movement of traffic now, and so you're really opening that section of downtown. And then you do the same thing for Barry Street, where you're taking Barry Street in the other direction now, from Lower South Camp Road to Peshon Street, which means that you start to open up downtown so it's easy. The security issue becomes less, and it's easy for people to move to the terminus.
Speaking of movement in that area, I know this is not your remit, it's more the NAA, but I'm sure you have communication with them. Any idea how soon the whole Marcus Garvey situation, we're going to have some alleviation?
Well, we're going to have discussion with them next week on the issue of Marcus Garvey, so I don't want to comment on it until we have had those discussions.
And the whole issue surrounding the gullies and drains in terms of the cleanliness and how you enforce against people dumping it, those are things we're looking at.
Those are issues that we have to look at.
Because that's a major issue. Yeah.
That's major.
So you have any timeline on these things? I mean, anything you've given them a specific thought to that, this will be done by X date?
The timeline on the Darling Street and connecting Darling Street to Water Lane and some others I see in 1 year.
And what about things like the illegal vending?
Tower Street would be in 1 year, probably less than 6 months.
Okay.
What about
illegal vending? It's ongoing, our first move, and we hope to achieve that by April. So let's say April to June, the pedestrianization of Beckford Street. That will take a lot of our vendors from other areas. And then we intend to move quickly on the Jubilee Market, which will take another set of vendors off the street. That should be in 1 year.
One of the issues, though, to me, is that it's not all just about the vendors, but people who actually know that they're in illegal spots and buying from them. Shouldn't those people be penalized also?
I wouldn't go that far. First, let's move. First, I'm just trying to get the vendors in places that are deemed legal vending areas or vending areas. That is our first move.
And I
don't see a problem resolving that issue
After that is
satisfactorily.
established, though, if people continue to violate the rules, they will be dealt with, right?
Oh, what do you mean, vendors?
Yeah, vendors.
Yes, yes. We will have to enforce the law,
Yeah.
and we'll have to maintain order, and the vendors.
And that is even coming around to Christmas time, too. 'Cause I know we're always a little lax at Christmas, but
Yeah,
we
but the
need to-
lapse, it's not really, when you say a lapse, it's really in the interest of economic activity. And because there are more people using downtown and the other sections of the city during that time. So we have to adjust to accommodate for the
But it will be done in an orderly way.
Orderly,
Because that's the thing,
orderly.
because sometimes they go on and they never come off again.
orderly order.
Okay.
Just
that's
before we go, Mr. Mayor, is it time, and this came up on the campaign trail, to directly elect all mayors?
I wouldn't go that route so quickly.
No?
I think
Why
there are
not?
some. We need to. I wouldn't say it. You have to look at. There are many issues to look at, and you want to ensure that the people of, for example, Kingston and St. Andrew, that they would have a choice in choosing the mayor.
Well, that's what a direct election would do.
You'd have to look more at the facts before you can determine that.
So you're opposed to it?
Yes, I believe what we have now is working, and unless you say to us that it is not working, and that directly electing a mayor is going to work and show us that, I don't think we need to change what is working.
All right, well, that's an entirely other conversation that we could spend quite a few more minutes on.
Another show.
I wish we had more time to take you up on that point, but we have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for joining us, Mayor and Senator Delroy Williams.
It was a pleasure.
When we come back, we take a look at this week's numbers and the word on the street. Welcome back to On Point. The 2017-18 budget was recently tabled in Parliament. Here are the numbers allocated to some of the major ministries.
The government plans to spend almost $710 billion this year. As usual, the lion's share is going to debt servicing $310 billion. Behind that is the public sector salaries at $193 billion, which includes money set aside for a salary increase. $56 billion is budgeted for the Ministry of National Security, a $2 billion decrease from last year when the budget included the cost of 2 ships for the Coast Guard. The Ministry of Education gets a $5 billion boost, taking it to $99 billion. So too the Ministry of Health, which is now at $62 billion. On the revenue side, the government is expecting to collect $690 billion in taxes. The vast majority of that is to come from taxes, $488 billion. The government is also expecting $4 billion in grants and $160 billion in loan receipts.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked Jamaicans, do you believe the government will fulfill its commitment to raise the income tax threshold to $1.5 million?
Oh, them are going right here now. You feel them all meet it. Am I dealing? And it more better for your country.
Yes, because I can understand that it would present more opportunities for youths who are in starter jobs to actually earn more and, of course, save more, and that would actually propel them further in the future.
That would be awesome, so that I can stop taking tax out of my pay.
My opinion from Prime Minister coming on this 1.5 thing, to me, is just the rich to benefit. It not benefit the poor. Me is the poor. Andrew Holness is my Prime Minister, but he need to step up in progress more.
Yeah, it will be nice. It will be a great thing for that, say, we pay the taxes all and we will more inclined to improve, the country, and I think it will be better for everybody. Everybody will find have a job to do.
No matter what you earn, tax supposed to be paid. Although I am not paying none at this moment, but tax still supposed to be paid.
Well, Dennis, We've seen the budget now. The numbers are literally laid on the table.
Yes.
So what do you make of it, Mr.
Well,
Accountant?
the thing that really surprises me is the huge revenue impact that we're going to be talking about. The question is how we're going to finance it. Dr. Phillips feels that the reason why we're in this pickle with revenues is because of the 1.5 million threshold that the government is trying to implement. The government feels it's necessary, but we're really taking from Peter to pay Paul, and looks like we're taking a little more from Peter too, to pay Paul, because we're actually increasing a lot more. The other point that I made, which based on analysis we did, is that direct taxation in this fiscal year is 27% of the overall revenue, and the proposed budget is to move direct taxation to 29%. That, in effect, is not moving from a direct to indirect taxation regime. So, it's left to be seen what happens from that.
Yeah, the thing I'm curious about seeing is how they're going to implement phase 2 of the 1.5, and also looking at the revenue numbers that were tabled. How is it that they have budgeted more revenues from income tax, even though they say that they're going to cut income tax and raise the income tax threshold? So I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out when the finance minister makes his budget presentation.
I think it might be mostly compliance, because remember, it's just one third, 25% to 1/3 of the working labor market that is actually registered for PAYE. So I think they're looking at it from that point of view. Will they get it? I don't know. But I agree. I think that the signal that's out there when you do this is that you're really you're not moving away from direct taxation. You're really relying a lot on direct taxation.
Yeah, well, the next few weeks are going to be very interesting. Yeah. That's our show. I want to say thanks to our production team, of course, our sponsors, and thanks to you for joining us for this episode of On Point. I'm Kalila Reynolds.
And I'm Dennis Chung. Until next week.
On Point was brought to you by National Baking Company.